Hi, my name is Daudi Mugabe and this is Business Mike episode 24. My guest today is Sir John Hargrave. He's the CEO of Media Shower as well as the author of a book titled Mind Hacking. In this episode, we discuss what mind hacking is as well as the life-changing benefits of reprogramming your mind. All this and more next on Business Mike. Thank you so much, John, for joining us today. Could you briefly tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Sir John Hargrave, and I am a mind hacker. That means I've learned to reprogram my mind like you'd reprogram a computer, and I'm here to share how to do that with your listeners, Dowdy. I'm also the CEO of Media Shower. We are a content marketing company, and we teach these mind hacking techniques to our team, to the people who work with us.
Well, just like I told you during the pre-interview chat, I'm very excited to have you on the show. You're the very first author I've had on the show and the very first sir I've had on the show as well.
It's my honor.
I'm really excited about this interview, and we'll basically tell the viewers how it is that you came to be a sir at the end of the show in case they're interested in becoming knighted themselves.
That's good. I like the way you teased that for the end of the show. Very good. Nice.
Yeah, we have to keep them hooked, you see. Well, you've got a book that's out called Mind Hacking. What is it about?
Yeah, the premise behind mind hacking is that your brain can be reprogrammed. And a hack is kind of like a clever technique or a shortcut, a trick in learning to get something done, to solve a problem. And so mind hacking is like a user manual for the mind. It's a series of techniques or hacks that we can use to get on top of our thinking to help move our lives in the direction we want them to go. So if we are entrepreneurs or we are running a business, we can use mind hacking to make our minds more effective and help us move more quickly into accomplishing the goals and the dreams that we have for our lives. Does that make sense?
It does, but I have to ask, how is it different from, say, meditation?
Good question. So meditation is part of the mind hacking program that we have in the book. And meditation is basically, we call it concentration training because that's what it is. But concentration training is really about learning to become aware of your mind. So when we meditate or concentrate, we learn to see that we're not our minds. There's something else. And if I can just ask your listeners to do a little thought experiment, basically think about your mind for a moment. That's it. Just think about your mind. And when you do that, you see that there is something called a mind, and then there's something called you. The two are not the same. You can think about your mind. And so with meditation or concentration training, we learn how to become aware of our mind, to see it as like this tool or like a computer. And then through the other techniques of mind hacking, we're able to reprogram it to get rid of the bad thinking and replace it with good stuff.
In your book, you talk about how the mind can be related to, say, a movie in a theater and how it's separate from you. Could you just elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah. So when you go to the movies, you're sitting in the theater, and if you're like me at the beginning of the movie, you're not really paying attention, or you might be thinking about the actors or the directors or the music. I make a lot of jokes at the beginning of the movie. I'm very noisy and disruptive in the movie theater. But then if it's a good movie, you get lost in it, right? You get absorbed into the movie. And that's the point of a movie, is to forget your boring life for a minute and to actually get wrapped up into this story. And our minds are the same way. So throughout the day, even though we can intellectually understand, I'm not my mind, throughout the day, we really are caught in this mind movie. And so when our minds tell us something like you'll never succeed at that business venture, or you'll never find true love, or you're not very good at math, whatever those things are, we tend to believe them. We forget that we don't have to believe everything we think. we forget that our mind is something that we can actually control. So again, the first step or stage of mind hacking is all about learning to get ourselves out of that mind movie, like stepping out of the theater, so we can then learn to take control of our thinking.
Right. There's a personal experience I have that's very similar to this. Sometimes when I'm dreaming, for whatever reason, I keep having a nightmare where I'm about to do an exam or a test, only to wake up and, well, it was just a dream. So I used to have that dream time and time again until I reached a point whereby within my dream, I realized it's a dream. So you're in a situation, maybe it's scary or something of the sort, but then when you consciously tell yourself, this is a dream, this isn't real, the way things play out within that dream go completely a different direction.
Oh, I love that story, Dowdy, and that's very similar to what we're talking about, where you realize you become conscious of this thought that's going through your head, and doing that allows you to gain control over it or to master it. So in your dream, you're able to see, okay, this is a dream. You're becoming aware somehow that this recurring thought pattern is a dream, and then you're able to kind of direct it where you want it to go, or at least have some kind of control over it. That's the same idea. There's another story given by this guy named John Sonmez, who runs a great podcast called Simple Programmer. And he said whenever he would get stuck in traffic, he would get really upset about the traffic. And one day he became aware that, like, every time I'm in a traffic jam, I'm getting really upset and I can't do anything about it anyway. So he made this decision that I'm going to start seeing it as an opportunity. So when he got stuck in traffic, he would catch himself getting frustrated, and then he would start saying, okay, well, what can I do with this time? I can think about a problem, or I can listen to a podcast. I can do something constructive. And by doing that, by becoming aware, seeing that negative mental loop and then reprogramming it with a positive thought, just like you did in your dream, he was able to really bring not only greater personal peace, but also use that as a really productive, positive time to move his life forward.
And I can see how we can apply this in business from time to time. I'm just going to create a scenario just to see how mind hacking can help us. Let's say you have tasks for the day, you're a business owner, and you've got a list of things that you need to do, but they're playing in your mind, they're just scattered around your brain. And just as you start doing one of these activities, you get a phone call, and there's another activity being dumped on your desk. It could be of a higher priority or a lower priority. So you've got this cluster of thoughts in your mind. How can mind hacking help us organize our thoughts and ideas in a way that can be productive?
It's a great question, and every business owner runs into this constantly, right? There's so many things vying for your attention. And the large part of the book is about what we call mental decluttering. And the idea is that there are so many distractions, and especially if you have a digital business or you spend a lot of time in technology, think about all of the chat requests and instant messages and text alerts and useless emails, all of these things that interrupt your flow, your state of concentration. And so we talked a little bit about concentration training using meditation or our version of those exercises. But also you can consciously craft a distraction-free work environment by taking an hour to shut off a lot of those things. So shut off Skype when you're not using it and your instant messenger, and set your text messages to vibrate and unsubscribe from email lists. And that's a 1 hour investment in time that will pay off into the future. The research shows that every time one of those interruptions comes in, it creates what they call an open task loop. And the idea is that there's this task in your brain that needs to be kind of closed, and you feel a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of clutter, a little bit of psychic clutter whenever those things happen. And so shutting off as many of those as possible will actually let you feel not only more relaxed and less anxious and stressed, but also it'll give you more time to focus on the things that really matter and carving out big blocks of time to really move your business forward is what effective business leadership is all about.
And is this similar to debugging of the mind?
Yeah, it's similar. So there's external distractions. So these are things that come in from around us, like I was just mentioning, your text messages and emails. But there's also internal distractions. There's the things that arise in our mind that when we should be working on an important proposal, say, maybe you should go watch YouTube for a little while instead. So that internal distraction, those are the things that we want to also be aware of. And we call it debugging, which is tracing back to the roots, these negative or distracting thoughts that hold us back. So, for example, as a business owner, I might tell myself, I've got a great idea for a product, but we can never do that because we don't have the resources. Well, that's a negative loop that's going on in my head, and it stops me from ever even getting started. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if I can catch that thought when it happens and I can realize, hey, there are other ways of getting this done, somehow there's a way of getting the resources to do this new product, then I can start to move my business forward and move it in the right direction.
Right, and I think sometimes those negative thoughts manifest themselves over time into reality. For instance, if you convince yourself that you're not good at something, over time it might become a reality, I guess.
That's right. I have a true story, which is from my personal experience. I used to say that I was no good with people. And so when I'd be talking with somebody face to face, I would be really self-conscious and I'd be thinking about how I was standing and what I was wearing and my complexion, everything, except the person I was talking to. And at some point I became aware that, I've got this negative loop going on that I'm no good with people. And it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you say I'm no good with people, you won't look for opportunities to interact with people, and you kind of won't be very good with people. Right. But then I said, well, what's the positive loop? If I want to debug that and now reprogram it, what's the positive loop I want to run? And it's I'm good with people. That's the positive loop. So I started telling myself that every day, hundreds, thousands of times, I'm good with people. And then when I would be talking with people, instead of that negative loop going on, I would start, when I'd notice it, I would just say, I'm good with people, and then focus on the conversation. And over time, doesn't happen overnight, but over time with repetition, it turns out I actually am kind of good with people now. So there is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're absolutely right.
Right. Now, I've read so many business books, and majority of them advise you to write down your goals or things you want to achieve in life. And many times they tell you to visualize yourself attaining these goals. Now, I've listened to an interview you've done before where you contrast visualization with simulation. What's the difference between the two, and when and where can we apply them?
There was a research study where the researchers had two groups of college students, and one group, they said, we want you to visualize getting a good grade in this class at the end of the semester. The other group, they said, we want you to simulate the process of getting a good grade in your mind every day. So in other words, think through all the steps that will be involved with getting to that good grade. So they had to sort of mentally simulate, studying, maybe having to turn down an invitation to go to a party, getting a good night's sleep the night before tests, doing well on the tests, finishing the exams, and so forth, and then getting the good grade. Well, the group that simulated consistently scored much higher than the group that visualized, sometimes a full letter grade higher. So the lesson from the research is when we picture the path of getting to our goals, not just the end goal, but the whole path of getting to our goals, we're more likely to achieve them. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that it works, and it's no magic or secret. Basically, when you're thinking through how you're going to get somewhere, including problems and how you're going to overcome problems, you're more equipped when those problems come up to not only be confident that you can handle them because you've already kind of simulated yourself getting over them, but you also are more confident, that you're going to be able to get through this and achieve your goal. So this trick of simulation, we have a whole chapter in the book on how to do that effectively, and it really works.
Right. No, I agree 100%, and I can personally testify to simulation helping me with regards to keeping time. For instance, if I have an appointment with someone, I don't just assume it will take me 40 minutes to get there. I sit down, visualize myself walking to the bus stop, visualize how long it will take the bus to fill, account for traffic. I basically simulate my route all the way to that person's destination, and then factoring in everything and adding the minutes it will take to overcome all those obstacles, including traffic. I'm able to give them a time frame which 9 out of 10 times is accurate. So I'm never late simply because I visualize as opposed to making assumptions of the time it will take me to get somewhere.
That's beautiful, and that's a simple example of what we can all do with our businesses when we're trying to achieve much more complicated and long-term goals. You do that same approach. You think through, well, here are the steps that I think we'll take to get to this long-term goal. Now, will things happen exactly like you've simulated in your mind? Almost certainly they will not. Life is what happens when you make other plans, as John Lennon said. So as those new situations arise, though, because you've done all these simulations, just like a computer, you'll be more equipped, more able to successfully find your way to the goal.
In your book, you make several references to movies. For instance, you talk about the concentration training, which you relate to the Jedi training in the Star Wars movies. There's another part there where you talk about the Matrix. And I have to ask, out of all the movies that involve the mind, what's your favorite?
A lot of them are listed in the book, but I'll tell you a good one that I just saw is called Inside Out. It's a movie this summer by Disney and Pixar, and it's an animated film for kids and adults, and it's about what goes on in this young girl's mind, and all of the emotions have a little character that they play, and what she learns throughout the movie is how to integrate all of those emotions into her life instead of just favoring certain emotions. So there's a lot of kind of profound psychology in that movie, but it's also very entertaining, and there's a lot of good science in it about how we store short-term and long-term memories and the purpose of sleep and things like that. So I would recommend that for people who haven't seen it. And it's also visually beautiful film, just stunning.
Well, in your book, you mentioned reality distortion field. What is it, and how can we create our own reality distortion field?
Yeah, this comes from Steve Jobs, who people described as having a reality distortion field. And the famous story was a new programmer came onto the original Macintosh development team. And one of the veteran programmers said, "We're about to go into a meeting with Steve Jobs. We've got this crazy deadline that we have to meet for this software." I think it was like 12 weeks. And the new programmer says, 12 weeks can't be done. He said, "I know, but when you go in and talk with Steve Jobs, he's going to convince you it can be done because he has a reality distortion field." And so they went into the meeting, and the guy came out totally convinced they could do it in 12 weeks. And they did. So apparently, they say, Jobs had this ability to convince people. He believed in something so strongly that he could convince other people that these things were possible as well. And I believe that we all have within us the power to create our own reality distortion fields. When we believe that something is possible, when we can simulate it clearly in our minds, when we've written down our goals and done all of these other tools that we've been talking about, then when we interact with other people, we really are able to spread some of that to them and help them believe also that these things are possible. And that's the magic and mystery of mind hacking.
Wow. There's a particular section in your book that I read which really caught my mind, and I was really fascinated by it. And it was playing out scenarios all the way till the end. For instance, when someone is perhaps contemplating leaving their job, they quickly stop thinking about that immediately because they have flashes of the negative stuff that might happen. But in your book, you encourage people to actually think it through, play out the scenario and see what the absolute worst case scenario is before you actually quit, because you may be able to overcome that absolute worst case scenario. Can you just expound on that a bit more?
Yeah, it's a good hack or technique when you are anxious or worried, is to imagine the worst case scenario. And most of the time, as you said, Dowdy, we have kind of a vague anxiety or worry. I felt this when I had a day job and I left to become an entrepreneur. And when I was considering making that jump to doing my own business full time, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. And this is one of the tricks I used, was to say, okay, well, what's the absolute worst case scenario? You know, do I lose everything I own? You know, am I living on the streets? And as I kind of talked about these worst case scenarios, I realized, well, most of them were silly. Most of them were very, very unlikely to happen. And even if the business failed miserably, there would be lots of opportunities along the way to, you know, maybe go find another job or pivot the business model to something else, or, you know, take freelance work. So there were all these other things that options that I would have before the worst case scenario could really happen. So really putting yourself through that exercise can be useful, because you see most of the things that you really fear are rather silly when you put them into the light of your consciousness, of your mind.
What's the power in making tiny goals? When earlier we discussed writing down your goals and visualizing them, or sometimes simulating them. But there's where you talk about particularly going for tiny goals. What's the advantage of doing that?
Well, there's a great book called Getting Things Done by David Allen, and it's all about the art of productivity. And he talks a lot about feeling overwhelmed by large goals. And, you know, if you want to run a business and you want to start a business and have it become, you know, a $100 million a year business, well, that's a big goal. It feels very overwhelming to think about how you're ever going to get there. But if you just focus on what's the next step, what's the next thing I need to do to move this ball forward, what's the tiny goal that I can accomplish today that would move me in that direction, then you have something you can do. You can have a task that you can actually put on a list, accomplish, and then check off. And so this idea of every day coming up with the tiny goal that you need to move in the direction of the big goal is incredibly powerful. And we have a whole series of criteria that we use to make sure your goal is good. But that's the basic concept behind it. Now, when you're combining that with the simulation exercise we talked about, you're getting a good picture every day as you're running those simulations of where you need to go to get to your big goal. And then on a daily basis, you have a much clearer idea of, okay, here's the little thing that I can do today to really make that work. Making that a discipline, making it a daily practice to find that little goal and to do it, it's difficult, but that's what pays off in the end. That's what really moves you toward those business goals.
Now, for the listeners, I'll just like to tell everyone that everything we've discussed today with John is actually in his book called Mind Hacking, and we're all fortunate because the book is available for free. John, can you tell us where we can get the book?
Yeah, so it will be available as a traditional book available in bookstores everywhere and on Amazon in January 2015. You can actually pre-order it from Amazon right now. It's a beautiful book. In the meantime, you can also download a free preview copy at mindhacky.ng. So that's mindhacking with a .ng instead of a .com. And we have really treated this book like open source software. We've made it freely available to download and even modify and improve. We've had thousands of beta testers go through our 21-day mind hacking program and download the app. And that has really helped us improve the final book and make the program even more effective for people to learn this skill of mind hacking.
It has this techie feel to it, a geeky feel to it. So people who are into programming or coding will really enjoy it because of some of the terms you use. But it's well-rounded because it has different elements which I think would appeal to everyone, no matter what field you come from, because there's parts where you talk about movies, which are hinted on, like Star Wars and The Matrix. You go into sports where you talk about Jack Nicklaus. And the very beginning, well, it starts like an action movie, the FBI storm into your house. So I don't know if there are many mind-hacking books that start like that.
Well, thank you for the compliment. And yeah, I definitely wanted to make it a fun read and something that was enjoyable to learn these techniques rather than a bunch of very dry neuroscience.
No, it's very exciting. But I have to ask, what is it about releasing it early for people to have a read that you've experienced that maybe people who would release their book in the store wouldn't? What's the advantage of releasing it early, and what's the disadvantage?
Well, it's a good question. It's an experiment for everyone, and I credit my publisher for giving this a try, because this is not the usual publishing model, and usually authors are not promoting their books months before it comes out. But really our goal is to get it out to as many people as possible. So we really feel like the more mind hackers that we have out there learning and using these techniques, the better off the world will be. But also, from a commercial standpoint, we trust that when you do something good and people get something out of it, they're going to tell friends and they're going to share it with people. They're going to buy copies for others that they know and love. And what's more important to me, there's an author named Cory Doctorow who said, it's more important that I get more people in under the tent than make sure that everybody under the tent has paid for a ticket. And I feel the same way. Let's get this mind hacking movement as large as possible.
If the tables were turned today and this were basically your podcast and I was your guest, what's the one question you would ask me?
What's the purpose of life, Dowdy? I want to just give you a really hard one there. I had to give you something really tough.
Do you know what my answer would be to that?
What's that?
To breathe and not stop breathing.
Yeah, it could be. That's one of the purposes anyway. Hopefully there's something higher than that, though.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You're called Sir John Hargrave.
Yeah.
How does this come to be? How did you get that title or name?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. So, since you've listened all the way to the end of the podcast, Dowdy teased it at the beginning. Now here comes the payoff. I hope I can pay this off. So, some years ago, I wrote the Queen of England, and I asked her if I could be knighted. I wrote her a letter. Said, Your Majesty, I would like to be called Sir John Hargrave, because I just thought that sounded classier. So anyway, the Queen wrote me back, and she said, I'm sorry, but you have to do something honorable or noble. I was like, well, that's a lot of work. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. So instead, I went down to my local county courthouse. And here in America, you can pay a small fee and go before a judge and have your name legally changed. So that's what I did. And here I am before you today, Sir John Hargrave. And kind of a name hack, if you will.
Thank you so much, Sir John, for all the tips. And thank you really for the book that you've put out and enabling us to read it in advance before you release it in the bookstores. How can people get in touch with you on social media or a website?
Yeah, so again, the book is at mindhacky.ng. You can also follow me on our blog at MediaShower. That's mediashower.com/blog, where I write regularly as well.
I'll put all this information on your show notes page, which will be businessmike.com/Sir John Hargrave. And I'll also include a link to the Amazon pre-order page so that you can pre-order Mind Hacking from Amazon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John, for your time today. I really appreciate you coming onto the show, and we wish you all the very best with your book and businesses.
Dowdy, thank you for having me on, and thank you for running such a great podcast. You're doing a great job with this.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to Business Mike today. And if you'd like to listen to more episodes just like this one, simply go to businessmike.com. For all the links and resources mentioned in this particular episode, simply type the name John into the search bar to access his show notes page. Thanks again for listening, and until next Monday, take care.